Good morning, good afternoon, and hello everyone joining us live on YouTube today, and welcome to the second annual Douglass Week. I'm Dr. Caroline Dunham Schroeder, and I'm the founder of Douglass Week, and we're absolutely delighted that you're all here to join us for this fantastic week and this very fantastic event today. And I'm here with my wonderful colleague and friend, and also Douglass Week co-founder, Kristen Leary.
Thanks, Caroline. Hello, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We're delighted to welcome you to this week of celebration of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass and other change makers, including our panelists today. Our aim is not only to commemorate the history of Frederick Douglass and others, but also to discuss contemporary issues of identity, race, independence, and equal rights around the world. Some of the themes we emphasized last year were connectedness and collaboration, and we hope you agree that these themes continue to bind our programming and our events and activities over the course of the week.
Yeah, and today's event is called A Conversation on Douglass and Being Irish in Modern Ireland. And our wonderful panelists will explore the legacy of Frederick Douglass, but also be exploring his legacy on Cork and in Cork. And they'll also talk about Irish society and issues of race and racism in Ireland.
And this year, in addition to virtual discussions like this one, we have in-person events in Cork, Ireland, and here in Washington, D.C. in the US, where Douglass and his family moved 150 years ago in 1872, and where they lived for more than 20 years. But we're of course delighted that our virtual events also give us the opportunity to connect with people all over the world. And you can follow us by looking for and using the hashtag Douglass Week.
Yes, hashtag Douglass Week. And before we begin this event now, there are just a couple of small things that we wish to note in terms of housekeeping. So this event will be about approximately an hour. If you have any questions, you can pop them here in the YouTube chat. So you're live on YouTube, you can put your questions or any comments that you have in the YouTube chat. We will be monitoring that and we'll then pass them on to the speakers. Just a reminder, please, we ask everyone to be respectful and mindful what you say and what you say to our panelists and how you interact with audience members. And inappropriate conduct will not be tolerated. So thank you so much for being respectful, everyone.
Yes, thanks everybody. And just one more piece of housekeeping that for your information, this event and all events throughout Douglass Week will be recorded and will be available for viewing in the coming days. And don't forget to check out our full program on our website. Almost all of our events will be live here on YouTube, and you can join us live or rewatch the events during the week and of course afterwards.
Yeah, and we hope that you enjoy this Douglass Week event. And I will now hand over to the wonderful Dr. Amanullah De Sondy. Thank you, Aman, for being here. Thank you for putting this wonderful panel together. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for joining us. And I will hand over to Aman. Enjoy, and thank you so much.
Hello.
Thanks, everyone.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Douglass Week 2022. We are here, or I am here in sunny Cork to have this special conversation on Frederick Douglass, thinking about his visit here to Cork and what it means to speak about being Irish in modern Ireland here now in 2022. I have a wonderful expert panel, and we're going to explore today the legacy of Frederick Douglass and that legacy of Frederick Douglass here in Cork. Where are we in Irish society on issues of race and racism? And we'll also discuss identities, which are always complex, and the issues of belonging or being Irish in a modern Ireland that we like to understand, we believe, is diverse and inclusive. I want to thank all the organisers of this event, especially Caroline, Kristen, Medea, and here at University College Cork, Anne-Marie from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Unit. We have an hour, so I've given our panelists homework. I asked our wonderful panelists to think about a quote from Frederick Douglass, or to find a quote that speaks to them, and then to discuss with us as we open this conversation on why that quote is significant for them. So I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and then speak a little bit about that quote. And I'm going to begin with Dr. Roja Fazaeli. Hi, Roja.
Hi, Aman. Thank you very much for the invitation to this brilliant event. My name is Roja Fazaeli. I'm Associate Professor in Islamic Civilization, Trinity College, Dublin, and also the Chairperson for Immigrant Council of Ireland. So thank you very much. I'm glad to go first because I was worried someone else would choose the same. I'm sure it will happen. But so the quote that I've chosen is, a smile or a tear has no nationality. Joy and sorrow speak alike to all nations, and they, above all the confusion of tongues, proclaim the brotherhood of man, or, as we would say now, common humanity. So this whole kind of a smile or a tear has no nationality. Joy and sorrow speak alike to all nations. It really talks about our shared humanity. It speaks to all of us. In particular, the image of the migrant comes to mind, where the migrant is often dehumanized, but the quote itself speaks volume to humanity and agency for all. And for those of us who read some things of Douglass when he was in Ireland, it was he got a very human reception when he lectured in Ireland, and this really stands to Ireland's history and points the way for the future, because he's written about this to his friend William Lloyd Garrison, saying how he was received in Ireland, that he was a person, he wasn't somebody in shackles.
Thank you very much, Roja. I'm going to come back to you in a moment as we discuss what you've just said in terms of where we are today. But before I do that, I want to welcome and introduce Fiona Finn. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, Aman. Hi, everybody, and thank you. I feel like I'm in exalted company here with this extraordinary panel. So I'm Fiona Finn. I'm the CEO of NASC, the Migrant and Refugee Rights Centre. NASC is the Irish word for link, and in NASC we link migrants and refugee communities to their rights. We work with about 1,300 refugees and migrants each year so they can vindicate their rights. The quote that sort of stood out for me is the quote that it's not light that we need, but fire. It's not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. And I think for me, when you're kind of thinking about what it means to be Irish, and then also looking at, kind of trying to examine the idea of Irishness and looking at kind of the experiences that we hear from kind of ethnic minority communities in Ireland, it's that need really to be, to make your voice heard, that kind of that notion that to be unapologetic, to clearly and proudly say, I'm here, I'm Irish. Do you know what I mean? And also I think equally it applies to white Irish people like me, in the sense that, so if you see racism or discrimination, it's not about, ignoring it or being passive. It's around that idea that you need to stand in solidarity with our ethnic minority communities and our ethnic minority neighbours and friends, and say, well, yes, and call it out when you see it happen. So I think for me that's really important, because I think Irish people tend to be, by nature, we don't want to kind of get involved. Do you know what I mean? We're a little bit, I'm not quite sure, and kind of a little bit nervous about speaking out. And I think that's really, for me, I think it's really critical and it's important. And you could really see the power of that power of, the storm and the whirlwind and the earthquake in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think in Ireland, we felt the kind of the ripples of that storm and that whirlwind and that earthquake. And I think from our perspective, what kind of emerged from that then is this extraordinarily powerful new voices of Black and brown Irish people, that are just absolutely phenomenal. And they're kind of taking center stage now, and they're taking that space, and it's quite extraordinary and to watch. And I think it's something that I personally, stand in awe of, and I'm extremely, extremely proud. So I think for us, it's just that, for me, it's just that little piece that, that assertiveness, I think, is extraordinarily important and extraordinarily powerful.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm now going to move on to Sahar Ahmed, who I think is joining us from Pakistan.
Yes, that's right. I am joining you from Pakistan, where it's night. So, hi.
Hi, Sahar. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and thank you so much for having me. So my name is Sahar Ahmed. I am a recently newly minted doctor, Sahar Ahmed. Just finished my PhD and just qualified as one. So I am from Pakistan, and I moved to Ireland as a student. And so I think that's sort of the quote that Frederick Douglass says that really resonates with me. Is really sort of frames my identity in Ireland at the moment. And the one that speaks to me the most is that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did it, it never will. As a legal academic, as a legal practitioner, someone who's practiced human rights law in a number of different jurisdictions now, the one thing that always comes to mind in my personal life and professional is the power dynamics that are around us constantly in everything we do, whether it's race, whether we are an ethnic minority or racial minority living in a predominantly white environment like Ireland, or whether we are gendered minorities or whether we're religious minorities. Irrespective, there's a power dynamic at play. And those in power never want to concede or give away any amount of power unless and until people struggle and demand for it. The uprisings that we've seen in the last 2-3 years, longer in different aspects, but particularly with Black Lives Matter, we see that. We've seen a collective rise and demand for their rights to be taken seriously, for their rights to be upheld. And we see a very serious, strong opposition against those rights being granted, but against that noise that has, like Fiona talked about, that thunder and that lightning, and that there's been a massive opposition all around the world. And I am inspired both in my personal lives as a brown Muslim woman living in Ireland, but also as a Pakistani. I'm inspired by images of racialized women who are standing in defiance against oppression. One of the most startling images, I think it was very poignant that I was asked to come on for this event, just as the image of Muskan in Karnataka in India, screaming and shouting in opposition to Hindutva protesters against her hijab in India just 2 days ago. I felt very poignant that this is what I have been come to speak about, when that is what my racialized religious minority sisters are doing and fighting for. So I thought that just really resonates with me, that we will have to shout and we will have to demand, scream for our rights, because no one's going to give them to us otherwise.
Thank you so much, Sahar. This is a little bite from our panelists. We're going to get up close and personal on these on all that they're sharing in a few moments. I'm now going to move to Joanna Dukipati. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Very warm welcome, Joanna. Or I was told to call you Jo, since we're friends.
Yep, Joanna Dukipati. Just so you know.
Thank you very much.
I'm so overwhelmed to be here and to speak right after Sahar. Oh, that is like amazing. I've lived in Ireland for 12 years, 10 in the south, 2 in the north. So if anybody in Ireland asks me, where are you from? I'm from Belfast. And they're like, what? I'm from Belfast via Bombay. That's what I would say. And I'm straight going to jump into the quote because I picked 4. And Fiona already spoke about one of them. So I'm like, oh, which one do I pick? I'm going to pick they all speak to me. I mean, the way he writes, is an excellent communicator. Oh my goodness. So it's so hard to pick. No man can put a chain about the ankle of his fellow man without at last finding the other end fastened about his own neck. That's about solidarity. That speaks volumes to me about how interconnected we are. We are dependent on each other. That's why this whole thing about allyship, the conversation about allyship, is extremely important. And how can we be strong allies to each other? We all have privilege depending on context, and we should understand that. And it's in a world where being an individual is of utmost importance, and there is equally important conversation about authenticity, but we also have to understand it's so different from individualistic. We depend on each other. We take we take from each other. Yesterday, I was speaking to Cecilia, who works at NASC, and I said to Cecilia while we were talking, if we give a little, just a little in a moment, we get a lot from a conversation, from an interaction, and that's why that speaks volumes, that we are tied to each other in a non-oppressive way. That's our aim. That's what we want to move towards, and that brings us back into who am I in this panel. I gather stories from Cork, off Cork, for Cork, and beyond, and I put them all into a digital magazine called Good Day Cork. That is just one of the hats I wear. There's loads of other work that I do, and I've understood in the last 4 or 5 years that I am incredibly good at connecting people and getting people to do things within reason for the common good, to improve the health of our community. When I mean health, I'm talking about understanding that we're so diverse. There's nothing to be afraid about our diversity. It is our strength in Cork. It's changing, and everything that I do is about amplifying that and embracing that. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Jo, for sharing that. And we're going to come back to you to hear more about this digital project, and here's more, and every power and strength to connection, so that we can connect within our local here in Cork. A very warm welcome to you, Amin Sharifi Isaloo. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Amin, I know we've had long conversations about getting people's names correct, spellings of people's names correct, saying their names correct. I think I've actually been saying, I just heard you say Roja. Is it Roja or is it Roja? I don't know. I'm sure I've been called all sorts of things, but let's not get into names. Very warm welcome, Amin.
Thank you very much, Aman. My name is Amin Sharifi Isaloo. And as you mentioned before, some people, they are mixing it with other names, particularly your name now. Our colleagues, they were calling you, and I was thinking they are with me, or when they were calling me Amin, I was thinking that they are calling Aman. Okay, but that is just pronunciation. It doesn't matter. You can call my name whatever you want. I am a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Criminology, and my research currently focuses more on asylum seekers and immigrants. I'm doing research currently on participatory arts for advocacy, activism, and transformational justice with young asylum seekers. I'm working on this project with our other colleagues and activists. But why it is important to do research about asylum seekers and immigrants in Ireland? My own experience, asylum seekers cannot say who they are. That is the problem and issue in Ireland, and I experienced myself personally this issue when I arrived in Ireland. The people who they were living in asylum seekers accommodation center, they advised me to not say I'm an asylum seeker. The problem was that the people, they hadn't good reaction when you were saying I'm an asylum seeker, and it is the same. And in Ireland, in other European countries, we are talking about human rights, particularly the fundamental human rights and freedom. But in practice, we can see that it is different. Asylum seekers, they are isolated. discriminated and excluded from our society. And it is continued, and sometimes we are making laws or regulations to make it better, but still you can witness in our society, in Europe particularly, all of us, we are talking about human rights and freedoms. People, they are oppressed, particularly the minority groups, and they cannot say who they are. Even they cannot say they are asylum, because they have to make up something to tell to people. So there are other issues. I don't want to take your time. Maybe later on we will talk about other problems asylum seekers and immigrants they are facing in Ireland.
Thank you, Amin. And we're now going to move to some more general observations. But you know, the quote that kind of I saw all over the Douglas Week website that just is imprinted on my mind is the one where it says, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. If there is no struggle, there is no progress." And it just made me think about, you know, in relation to everything that you've all have just said, that there is we're in a tricky and a difficult situation at times where, you know, I know for myself who came to Ireland in 2015, you on one side, you love being here, you love the hospitality, you love the banter, you love all the wonderful things, but yet, you know, we're in some way expected to play the good immigrant or the good person who comes in. Just, you know, a stiff upper lip, just accept it, just, you know, see how it goes, don't complain, don't be critical. And if you do, I think there is it's as if we are expected to behave and act in a particular way. And it's to that I want to really open up this discussion to, because I think what this pandemic has taught us is that it has grounded us all. It has led us all to a moment where of empathy, of sympathy, to understand what it's like to be locked down, to see suffering at such an immense and immeasurable level globally. We've seen or heard of friends, of family dying, and you know, and all of this has led us to think about some of these societal issues. It's also been a pandemic on a pandemic for minorities. And I think this is inextricably bound to a moment like this where we're talking about the legacy of Frederick Douglass and all the quotes that you've spoken about. I read a recent article that said that came from somebody who no longer lives in direct provision, saying that it felt like they were bound. And that word has been ringing in my head ever since I read that article, that statement of somebody feeling bound. And for me, coming from the absolute liberty from, the most wonderful, or dare I say it, place in the world, Scotland. And, I say that tongue in cheek because Pakistan is just as good and Ireland is just as good. And then we start competing. But on a more serious note, the idea of being bound has really made me think about some of these issues. And for somebody saying that today in modern Ireland, in an Ireland which we like to believe is diverse and inclusive, is shameful, I think, and a moment of shame for all of us. So I want to ask my panelists, where are we today in terms of these societal issues of minority rights? Are we at the hospitality stage? Are we on the equality stage? Are we on the equity stage? Where are we? I want to open up this discussion so that we can get to some of the core issues that I think Frederick Douglass has pushed us to consider. Who is going to begin?
Me.
Thank you. Go for it.
I think different demographics within our country, Ireland, are in different stages. And it also comes down to their knowledge base. it comes down to their own upbringing, their own context, and it's an extremely personal thing. That's how I feel. Now, my friends across the universe will say, well, your standards are very low of what you expect from people. But I don't think so, because I think that everybody is also doing their very best. And I also proceed in this world being an eternal optimist. I used to be an idealist, but I'm not an idealist anymore. So as an optimist, I think that I want to assume the best in everyone. And therefore, I feel that different people are in different stages, hospitality, having awareness and that. So that's my take on it. And I must say very quickly that my mother-in-law, she's incredible. She's Irish. She's from Charleville, and in that small town, village, whatever you want to call it, it's all context. She has said many times about how she, a person of a different color walks into the GP or is waiting in the queue at the the grocery store or whatever, and how she proactively makes conversation. And I think that comes down to the kind of person she is. She's the kind of person who has traveled. She's the kind of person who has this international, tropical-looking daughter-in-law, and so she has no fear of anything. In fact, she is a curious person, and she is now all of 70 plus, and she has always been like that. So when I'm looking at that age demographic, and just like and for every person that like her, there are those people who are ignorant, absolutely closed, to have nothing to do with it, and will pass all sorts of ridiculous comments. So that's an example I thought was very important for us to kind of get into the zone.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you, Jo.
If I may, sorry, Roja, no, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sahar.
I wanted to pick up from both what you said, Aman, and what Jo said as well. Sorry, Jo, I'm familiarizing myself with you as well and just going with Jo now. But I think, and I don't say this very positively, so forgive me, but I think we're at the equality stage, but I don't think that's great. The reason why I say that is because I find the conversation in Ireland, and I hate that I have to justify myself, and all of us have to justify ourselves when we say, I say this with love for Ireland. I don't say it with any malice, but we are at a very superficial stage of understanding equality in Ireland where we flatten identities. There is no understanding of context. There's no nuance. There's no understanding of the different intersections one person can occupy. Yes, I'm brown. Yes, I'm Muslim. Yes, I'm a woman. But I'm fairly privileged. I'm not working class. That's important. And those understandings are just not there. There's no understanding of how a brown or black person in direct provision, as you said, Aman, will have a very different experience of living in Ireland than someone like me who moved to Trinity College to do a PhD, having qualified as a barrister in London. I mean, the fact that we can equate those experiences as being the same just by virtue of being brown is damaging. And I don't think that helps the conversation, because I do think that that's where the conversation is right now, where it's incredibly superficial. And I think, and that also is important to understand when if we're talking about the future of Ireland, right? Like you, Jo, like I'm marrying an Irish man in a week. I will have an entirely Irish family now. I will have in-laws. I'm going to end up having like little weird caramel kids soon, and
they'll still be Pakistani. I'll make sure of that.
I'm not even debating names. They're getting Pakistani names. Like that's not even up for conversation. But the fact that I'm considering, despite all the privilege that I carry with me, the fact that I'm considering changing my name, which is not something I'd ever considered. And if I was marrying a brown Pakistani man, I wouldn't have even thought about it. But the fact that I am even thinking about, not professionally, but in my personal life, becoming Sahar Ní Lachlan is, or I don't know, I'm saying it's probably not me if I'm going to be his wife, I don't know. But the fact that I'm thinking of that, because I'm thinking it will make my life easier. It will make traveling with my future children easier if I'm not seen as their nanny and I'm seen as their mother. You know, these are very real conversations that we are not having because we're doing them so superficially. So
thank you, Sahar. Roja.
While you're talking, new kind of thoughts come to me. But you know, I don't know if Aman, you know this either. Like I've been in Ireland probably longest than well, not longer than Fiona, but I've been here more than 30 years. So I came as a child, and we experienced Ireland changing. So in the 1990s to now, it has become much more diverse. The discussions around kind of ethnicity, migration, race, and so on has evolved quite a lot. I do agree with you on kind of, you know, what a stage it's at, but I don't think that's just Ireland. I think there is a lot of political correctness out there without people understanding what it is. But I do want to say as well, like when we talk about Ireland, and context is really important. And at the moment where we are politically, where we are with the economy, we really have to take into consideration intersectionality as well, because it's just talking about race is not enough. You have to talk about race, class, ethnicity, gender, and economy as well. Like and this is, you know, I give this as an example. We helped, not that we brought over, we helped an Afghan scholar come to Ireland with his family recently. And really this land of 1,000 welcomes was there. The overwhelming support from the university setting in Trinity and Maynooth was really heartwarming in many, many ways. But at the same time, you can see, like, you have that one specific kind of case and who's working on it and how you can kind of help. But then, but you know, and there was so much support for this person and their family to get housing and so on. But what happens when immigrants come in? And I'm not even only talking about asylum seekers. I have colleagues, I'm talking about privilege, who come to university and they can't find housing. This is a huge crisis. Like talking about direct provision, this in hand. So this is why I think when we are talking about these discussions, really intersectionality is really important to bring forth.
Thank you, Roja. Fiona.
And I'm obviously very conscious of the fact of my privilege. I'm a white Irish woman, so this is my perspective might be very different, but I was very struck, Sahar, by what you had said. So when you were talking about, you know, where we are on the trajectory, and you talked about your privilege, but yet at the same time, you felt that, you know, you needed to you know, make your name sound Irish, you know what I mean? So Sahir O'Loughlin or whatever it was. Now, to me, that speaks volumes. To me, that speaks that we really haven't come very far at all. You know, and I found that, I found that quite surprising and shocking, and maybe not. Yeah, maybe when I sort of talked about it again, I thought, well, actually, no, it's not surprising, and it's not a criticism, but it's just a reflection of, I think, you know, if you feel that will make you feel more kind of part or make life easier for you, like as you said. I think my perspective of it, and I totally get what you're saying as well, Roja, in the context of. And I like I said, the welcome that Afghan people have had has been extraordinary. But which is a really positive thing. But what concerns me about that is, in Ireland, there's almost a perception of like the good migrant or the bad migrant, or the good refugee or the bad refugee. And it's all quite stratified, you know what I mean? And why it's absolutely 100% you do everything you can to support a refugee. But I do think there is a very, and it does come with maybe, you know, class or privilege, but there's a different lens through which I think people look at asylum seekers and migrants coming into Ireland. And I find that very difficult. And I think the other thing to add, I think it's only in the last, I would say maybe 2 years, that we've actually even started having these conversations in Ireland. Up until then, it was kind of ignored. You know what I mean? It was like swept under the carpet. It was like, we're fine, we're grand, we're the best little country in the world for migrants and refugees, and we're very welcoming. But I do think it's very positive that we're starting to have these conversations. Now, I'm not sure how many white Irish people are actually having these conversations. And I think that's really, really, really important that piece happens as well, because I think without that, we're never going to reach or move, I think, more closer to what we would call like real equality, not, as you said, not that flattened view or perspective.
Can I, before I go to you, Amin, can I go back to you again, Roja? Now, Fiona just said that these conversations are happening quite recently, but you've been here a very long time. Like, if I may, ask maybe a personal question. Do you think it's recent, or has there been a development of these questions on race and racism in Ireland?
Yeah, to be honest, just from my own experience, and I suppose my experience was as such that we were connected to people who would have been discussing these issues. So given our situation, we came to Ireland. My mom had a scholarship to do a PhD in UCD, and her scholarship, and this was from the Iranian horticultural ministry, and it was cut, talking about intersectionality, because they said she's a woman who's not married at the time. She's widowed. My father died in the Iran and Iraq war, and so she was left here with two young girls, and so the people around us. So you probably know the Irish Council for International Students, for example, and some other organizations, and some really kind of powerful women came to her aid. So those conversations were always within my kind of upbringing, and that's why I kind of came the direction I came, kind of academically as well. But I think it has evolved, as you said. I think we are talking, at the time. I give you an example. We used to go to register at the aliens office. I don't know if you remember that, Fiona. It was the GNIB was called the Aliens Office. So so a lot has evolved. Even teaching, like I've been teaching for the past 12 years in Trinity, and students' awareness has changed. Sometimes I feel like there is a generational gap there as well. Even with me, like it's you use certain language that's not accepted anymore, and but again, it really depends where these conversations are happening, whether they're happening at the grassroots or they're happening more at a certain level of society. And I've been to many workshops by brilliant organizations such as Immigrant Council, NASC, Glencree, and so on, that bring people together to have these conversations. But often these are the same people that come together again and again. So you're called upon as some sort of representative to go. So we have it's really handy to have a panel like this to open up where we are, where we should be going.
Thank you, Roja. Amin, tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing and how this connects to that.
Yes, thank you, Aman. Just before talking about my work, I would like to highlight one of the Douglass statements, and it is freedom is a road seldom traveled by the multitude. This is a very important statement, and it is intertwined with the other statements of Douglass. After Douglass visited Ireland in 1845, he stated about Daniel Connell that the fire of freedom was burning in his mighty heart. I don't want to compare myself with them, both Daniel and Douglass, but I always have opposed and always will oppose any attempt to undermine the fundamental rights, human rights, and freedoms. And I'm sure you will do the same, and you did the same. But unfortunately, from the secondary school in Iran until now, I have usually experienced and or witnessed that the fundamental rights and freedoms are undermined. All fundamental human rights and freedoms are listed on the Constitution, but in practice, everything is different. As Roja mentioned, in Iran, for example, they listed on the Constitution all freedom of expression and freedom of speech and so on, but always there is a condition, and that condition usually is that when it is against to the fundamental principles of Islam. But who is interpreting this, and what is the fundamental principles of Islam? The problem is that the authorities of the regime decide what is against the fundamental principles of Islam, not the people who have knowledge about those principles. And in EU, we witness the same thing. I mean, if you see that we are talking about the freedom of movement and access to employment and access to housing, education, and so on. But in practice, everything is different, particularly immigrant and asylum seekers. That is the area of my research. Because of that, I'm trying to focus more on asylum seekers and immigrants rather than to the other areas. So we can see that immigrants in practice, they cannot easily access the employment and the housing, education. And always you can see that, for example, asylum seekers in Cork, okay, they have a refugee status. They can rent a place outside of the accommodation center, but they cannot, because they cannot find a place to rent. And it is worse for people who they are from Africa. And it is not now, you are talking about the housing crisis now, but I'm talking about maybe 16 years ago. 16 years ago, people from Africa, they couldn't find any place in Cork to rent. Landlords, they didn't want to rent any place to them. So they moved to Mallow and Makrum. You can find them there now. Okay, and the problem is there, and nobody is solving the problem. Okay, it is somehow related to policymakers and government. They have to sit and think about. We haven't that power to solve the issue. Okay, we are discussing about the issue. We are highlighting the problem or diagnosing the problem, but it is up to policymakers, and they have to make a right decision and to make discrimination, exclusion, and other problems against human rights, the history. I mean, at least to reduce them if they cannot make a history. I mean, just to reduce these problems and particularly related to housing and education. Personally, myself, I had my minister letter in my hand. I have a right as an Irish person, okay, and I have to access education and the available job, but unfortunately it was too difficult, and usually it's still the same. But you know, I mean, I'm talking about maybe 16 years, 17 years ago, but it is still the same. I mean, the asylum seekers, even they are granted a refugee status, they have to stay 3 years in Ireland to be able to access the education. Okay, and then about the employment, in my time we were not permitted to work. We hadn't any permission. Oh, now that problem is solved somehow. There are issues. If I don't want to go to the detail, But if you think, you see that there are problems related to asylum seekers and refugees, and the United Nations reported about Ireland, but unfortunately nobody wants to solve the problem. I mean, policymakers or the government in Ireland.
Thank you, Amin. I think for those listening in, we're presenting the difficulties in what's happening in society, and like Sahar said, and I think many of you have said, we want to still remain optimistic, right? Because we all carry all sorts of privileges if we do, and I certainly do. So I think, but these kind of critical conversations are important if we are to consider the legacy of the likes of Frederick Douglass here in Ireland in 2022. Maybe if I could get my panelists to comment a little bit about the phrase which I used, modern Ireland, Irishness, being Irish. And I use this because, I still have, and I still see through popular media, discussions and presentations and representations of this is Irish. And whenever it is presented, I think I don't see myself in this at all. Not because I'm saying that we need to completely change that, but for me, I say this all the time, but I was born and raised in Scotland, where I grew up with a phrase which was, "We're all Jock Tamson's bairns." In a way, it instilled or made that Scottish tent a bit bigger of what Scottish or Scottishness could be. I think that I don't hear the Irish or Irishness tent in that broad way. Now, I'd like, correct me if I'm speaking, but I don't hear it. I still think that what is Irish or what is Irishness has been defined without being defined, because I've had conversations with Corkonians who I believe are the holders there, the upholders of what all Irish. I mean, Fiona's laughing. I've probably asked Fiona this. What is it? What is Irishness? And they will concede, oh well, it's a mixture of lots of different things. Yet we're told what it is. So let's have a little bit of a conversation about what is Irishness and what is modern Ireland now in 2022. Is it time to do away with our narrow ideas and broaden them out? I'm going to start with Sahar.
Thanks, Aman. I think the irony of what you asked is that when tourists come for a few days and experience Ireland, and the green St. Patrick's garb comes out, and the Guinness and the pints and the banter and the fun and the crack, I feel like they seem to think they have a better understanding, and they'd probably be able to tell you much more eloquently than what they think Irishness is than someone who's actually living in Ireland. I don't know. That's certainly been my experience. My parents visited once. They visited Dublin in 2019 for a grand total of 7 days. And they feel like they can talk about what is Irish, what is being Irish for much longer than I can. So I think Ireland is so many things, and I think that is what makes it beautiful, right? I do think being Irish is so many different things. And I love that. I love that there are so many different pockets of identity that you can find in one city like Dublin, which is the largest city. So I mean, in smaller, the fact that there's so much diversity that I can find of being Irish in just one city is promising, is wonderful. But I think that's the problem. I always get into trouble for saying this, but I do feel like the Irish don't know what Irishness is. And beyond the fun, and we are the land of a million welcomes, and we're great crack. And I don't think that there is anything deeper to that. And maybe that's, dealing with their own history of colonialism and coming out of that and developing as, beyond, a third world country in Europe, but now not being that, and now being one of the most developed ones with the tech hub of Europe. And maybe there's an identity crisis going on. But as someone new to Ireland...
I'm going to move to Fiona, but just on that point that you said, I don't think that the Irish understand what Irish are. I disagree with you on that, because, since I've been here in 2015, it's also been a very humbling experience for me, because I knew so little about Irish history, the history that we were never taught in Scotland. And it has been a real sobering moment to learn that, and some of the issues and identities take a lot. I mean, we know this, from there was only a recent book that came out on what is Pakistaniness, right? I mean, I don't know, what do we say? What is Pakistaniness? I mean, someday I've had many conversations with people here in Cork who said, Pakistaniness, Pakistan is a failed state. It's, you need to look to India. India has that prosperity, and you just sit there and you're just like, okay, what is going on? But again, it depends on how you understand that in some of the narratives. So I'm not entirely convinced that there isn't something that pulls together the Irishness, but I'm still trying to broaden that church. Fiona, help us out here.
Ooh, it's a kind of a hard one. I'm inclined to follow Sahar in a sense, and I do think that kind of dual thing, the stage Irish thing, but I think we're very conscious of that. I think Irish people are very conscious of it. I do also think that it is a very young republic. So yes, you had a colonial past. And then on top of that, then you had a very repressive church. And then you had the church and state, the way the church and state work together hand in hand. So, so now we're seeing, I think, an unraveling of that. And we're starting to see, I think for me, a kind of almost trying to kind of really form our identity. I think a lot of that identity is linked to Europe. I think we have a certain kind of forward-looking piece towards Europe, and maybe because the UK is not really where we would kind of naturally look to. And I do think that, maybe over the last 2 decades when we had marriage equality and repeal the eighth, I think those kind of pieces are extraordinarily pivotal in kind of defining this kind of new Ireland, if you know what I mean. And I think that for me is very important. I moved from Ireland in the 1980s, and living in Ireland in the 1980s, it was a very dark, grim, absolutely miserable place. Myself and all my kind of peers, we just couldn't wait to get the hell out. And then I moved to the UK and I adopted this weird Irishness that I didn't know wasn't even me. I was crying when I was hearing those awful ballads on the radio, and I was like, what is wrong with me? Do you know what I mean? I was almost, it was bizarre. And I think that immigration and that immigration past was very much tied up to this Irishness as well, and the loss and the suffering and whatever, you know what I mean? So I kind of think we are moving from that. I hope we are moving. I feel we are moving from that. And I think a couple of things around the kind of Irishness. I think a community and a sense of community is extremely important in Ireland. I also think we're a deeply skeptical people. I don't think we take things at face value. We don't believe a lot of what our politicians say. We're quite skeptical about that. And I like that about us, to be fair. And there is a certain cynicism. There is a certain wit, a kind of a dry wit, but also I think we tend to be quite passive aggressive. We don't like to challenge people overtly. And I think we're not very comfortable with conflict, and expressing ourselves.
I think that would that sum us all up. So we are Irish. We're all Irish.
Yeah. I want to add to what Fiona is saying. Yeah. If you're going to describe what is Irishness, I like to say that It's like a big Punjabi family, very quite loud, obnoxious when you need to be, slagging each other. There's also that community aspect with solidarity, showing love, even though sometimes it's very awkward, being emotionally expressive. It takes a lot for Irish people, and also, and to really express something, it's sad, but sometimes I feel like you need a few pints down before you actually express. And that, again, # drink responsibly, people, please.
Well, I'm going to have to stop you, because we are nearly out of time.
I know.
What happens when you're having fun? But what I want to do in the last few minutes, I'm going to do one final round where I'd like to give each of you a moment to leave us with something to think about. And I've got my eye on the clock. I feel that we're going to all be dumped into some sort of a game show gunk or something if we run out of time. So you have very limited time. So give us something to think about. Amin.
Yes, just as you mentioned, I'm optimistic. I'm sure Irish, they were themselves immigrants, and they are still immigrants in other countries. And people who they will be elected, they will sit and think about issues and problems, and they will solve the problems we have.
Thank you, Amin. Roja.
Yeah. Thanks, Aman. So I have to say, I love Ireland. I absolutely love Ireland. And what Fiona said, when I'm outside Ireland, I defend Ireland like nothing else. This Irishness comes out. And I think it's both ways. You had the question from the audience around integration as well. And I think sometimes you do have to think about it as somebody who now I consider myself as Irish Iranian. I want to be part of the community. I want to vote. I want my child to learn Gaelic Irish. I probably should have learned it by now. So I know I don't have time, so I'll go to the next person.
Thank you, Roja. Fiona.
I think for me, when I look at the phenomenal young Black and Irish people coming up, when you look at the how kind of visibly present they are, when you look at Denise Chyla, when you look at Fela Speaks, when you look at the emerging of these phenomenal voices, I feel very hopeful and positive for Ireland, and that's the kind of Ireland that I want to live in.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Jo.
I want to come back to our man Douglass, Frederick Douglass. He believed in the power of media, which is why he ran newspapers. And that, when I found that about him, I was like, oh my God, we're peers, because I have this, digital magazine. So professionally speaking, what he says, the life of a nation is secure only while the nation is honest, truthful, and virtuous. And I think that's where we're at. We as Irish, we're trying to step up to that call, you have to be honest and truthful. So yeah, that's how I feel about modern Irish.
Thank you, Jo. Sahar.
I'm very hopeful, not just because of the young Black and Irish, but because of the white Irish young people, to be honest. I think the only thing I have to say is that Ireland, the state, needs to step its game up, because if it doesn't, the young white Irish people will drag it up if it doesn't clean its act up. They will. They're brilliant. They know how to talk. They know what to say, and they know the right things to say, and they think really critically and well. And, but the state needs to fix itself, because it will be fixed otherwise.
Thank you so much. And once again, it's a very, very warm welcome to Douglas Week 2022. I want to thank my panelists, Roja, Amin, Jo, Sahar, and Fiona, in this conversation on Frederick Douglass, the time in Cork, and one of the important and pivotal questions of today on what it means to be Irish in modern Ireland. Thank you all for joining us on this sunny Thursday, the 10th of February. Goodbye and God bless.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye.